In 1946, Eric Bramall launched the Eric Bramall Marionettes and toured around the UK with his puppets.
He was working in the variety theatres, and in the variety theatres you were booked in by an agent. Eric's agent was a man called Hugh Stanhope, and he booked Eric on several tours. And also he asked Eric if he was interested in a summer season in Colwyn Bay. And this was to be in a show on the pier, because there was a magnificent pier in Colwyn Bay, which has disappeared, and also a lovely theatre on it. And so Eric did a season where he did half the show, and then an ordinary variety artist, dancing girls, magicians and whatnot, were on the other half of the show. And the council came with the idea, would it be possible for him to put his travelling theatre on the bandstand in Arias Park. Not just a little circular bandstand, but a proper building, almost like a theatre proscenium without the auditorium. Facing this proscenium of the bandstand was a grassy bank, and the idea of the council was, could he put his performance on there? And he said yes he could. And so they built him virtually a theatre, because they got almost a circus tent and built it on the front of the bandstand. It made a light proof so he could have proper stage lighting. They put in seating on the grassy bank, they put proper theatre seats in. And he did, I think it was 5 years or more, in the Arias Park Puppet Theatre. He used to do an afternoon show and an evening show, and did more adult material in the evening, and the afternoon show was a more family show. And over the years he built up quite an audience. We'd probably still be in the park now, except for the council decided it wanted to promote Rhos-on-Sea, and therefore they decided to move this very successful theatre into Rhos-on-Sea. And of course they didn't have a nice bandstand and a grassy bank there, so they built a council hut, which Eric and I christened the Rabbit Hutch, because it was such a preposterous design. And they transferred the puppet theatre into Rhos-on-Sea for 1 year. But Eric was very unhappy with it there, and he said to the council that he wasn't interested in signing for the next year unless they would like to put him back in the park, which of course they wouldn't. So Eric was looking at, actually he'd almost signed up for Bournemouth, but the lady who owned this land where the theatre's built, she had a house adjacent which was called Aberhod, and it had been her family home for years. And she was an amateur puppeteer who'd got to know Eric over the years, and she was very distressed at the idea that he was going to go away from the area. She said, wouldn't it be possible for us to find somewhere around here? And so then Eric and Millie and Hugh Stanhope, the agent, they started scouring the seaside towns round about to see if there was anywhere where they could hire for a season for the puppet theatre. So in desperation, Millie said to Eric, well, why don't you build one? And he said, where would you do that, Millie? So he said, in my garden. And that was what gave the idea. And they went along to the bank in Rhos-on-Sea and said, we want to borrow some money to build a puppet theatre. And he said, oh yes, how much? It was as easy as that. This was in 1958, which actually was a time when cinemas were closing down and they were becoming bingo halls. And so it was quite brave of the bank manager, I think, to agree to it. But the theatre was a success since then. And that's when I started working at the theatre from the opening of the Harlequin. But I'd known Eric since I was a schoolboy, through the fact that he was working in Arias Park, because I come from Yorkshire. You know, I was already a keen amateur puppeteer, and I was interested in puppets. And then when I moved down here, I heard about this puppeteer in Arias Park. But of course, a puppet show in Colwyn Bay, I had to go see it, and with the cheek of youth, within a couple of weeks I'd become a friend of the family, and I used to spend the whole of my summer holiday either watching the shows or chatting with him backstage.
Eric then went on to start the summer school alongside his shows during the summer season, in which people who wanted to study the art of puppetry could learn how it all works.
Summer schools were mostly, there were either puppeteers who wanted to become professionals or school teachers who were using puppetry in school. They were a week long, these courses. The same people really came every year.
1974 was the first one that I did. I only attended the last 3 summer schools. They'd been going for some years before then. I was only 14 at the time, and I'd been attending the Harlequin for a few years. I'd seen quite a few productions. And when you're sitting in the audience and you're wondering how on earth does this all work? What does it look like backstage? How does it all work? The summer school was the ideal opportunity to find out.
They used to come for the week, and we used to do talks on everything, on making puppets, on writing puppet plays, on recording them. We used to teach them bits about stage lighting, everything really.
So I asked Chris, would it be okay if I attended the summer school? I was only 14 at the time, and he said, yes, I don't see why not. So I think I was the youngest attendee ever. And that's how it came about.
They were great fun. We used to really enjoy them. Several of the summer school people went on to become professional puppeteers. Well, Ian Denny. Ian went off on his own to America and did touring around the schools.
It was actually 3 tours that I did over a period of about 5 years. So I would go over to the US at the start of the academic year in 1 year. All the shows were in schools. And then I would come back at the end of the academic year, which would be the next year. So I'd sort of span the years. And I used to be back in the UK for the summer, which was quite nice because I didn't see a British winter for about 5 years. I was working for an agency that was based in a very prestigious address on Laurel Canyon Boulevard in North Hollywood, right in the center of all the movie studios. And I worked in big cities like Houston and Dallas and tiny towns. But the show went great. It went down really well. I met lots of lovely people.
Due to the success of the theatre's opening in 1958, Eric was discovered by television and started making puppet shows for the BBC.
You see, the Harlequin Puppet Theatre is the first and only theatre to be ever to have been built for puppets in Britain. And because of this, it got quite a lot of publicity when it was first built, and it was covered by television, the opening. Eric was approached by a lady called Evelyn Williams, who was the head of children's programmes in Wales. She started off as head of children's broadcasting with radio, and then when television came along, she took over the same job there. But she was putting out some programmes called Telewele, which were children's programmes. They were just sort of variety programmes, mixture of whatever. And so she said, can you devise something and we'll translate it into Welsh. So some of the stuff we did, or Eric did, in the puppet theatre, well, then we started creating things especially for young children's television. They now had a series called Arlene Mam on Mother's Knee, which is the equivalent of Watch with Mother. You know, it was that sort of age group, 2-3-year-olds sitting on Mummy's knee. And so we started with Lily Long, who was a little Welsh doll, and she lived in a doll's house with her 3 friends. There was Poppy Poodle, a foppish poodle, who appeared in every single show with a different hat on, and Willie Awali Panda, and they were the sort of helpers. It was puppets playing as though they were children, like today we're doing the washing and singing little songs about washing, or today we're playing having a post office and we're sticking stamps on letters and things like that. And it was quite crude, but it went on for 30 years. It lasted for 30 years, did Lily Long, and we almost got a tour of Patagonia out of it. But also, we added to the Arlene Mam, instead of Lily Long, sometimes we had Taily Teddy Tut, which was a teddy bear family, and it was just stories about family life with teddy bears. And then Sheila Hugh-Jones, a lady who had worked with Evelyn on radio, and she had written a series of sort of woodland stories for radio, and so we were asked if we could make puppets for these and if we could translate it into a visual television programme. And so we got Willie Attilly Gordon. That ran for about 15 years, and so it went on. We worked with the BBC for over 30 years, but it was a very happy time those years on BBC Wales.
I think the first show I saw there was Sugar Ball, which was a TV show that Eric and Chris used to do, Yorkshire Television. And so I'd seen this TV show, Sugar Ball, on a little 10-inch black and white grainy screen. And then we went on holiday to Colwyn Bay. We went to the Harlequin. And as soon as the red curtain went out, there was this show that I'd seen on the TV, but here it was 10 feet wide, glorious Technicolor, and it was just amazing. So I was about 9 at that time. I think that was the first show I saw there.
When Evelyn retired, there was a new head of programmes, head of children's programmes, and he was a man called David Glyn-Jones. He got rid of most of the programmes that we'd been doing, apart from Lily Long. We had to continue that. But he wanted different programmes, he wanted punchier programmes. He'd got children himself and he'd got a good idea of what they wanted, and he was quite exciting to work with because I did all the scripts, but he then together we'd translate them, and he could add Welsh humour to them, which you can't joke in a language that you don't speak. And so he added a great deal to them, and he had quirky ideas. With the Evelyn, we'd done the sort of cute little animals, toys, that sort of thing. With David, we did Train Scrake, which was ghost train sort of thing. It was characters like the Addams Family, you know, a Dracula character, a witch, a vampire, that sort of thing. It was obviously his own children were more robust than the Watch with Mothers years gone by. It was some of those programmes that I really enjoyed working on because they were more of a challenge.
In 1963, Eric hosted the first international puppet festival to be held in Britain with around 30 nations represented.
There'd never been a puppet theatre built in Britain before, and so Eric, liked being first. He found out that there'd never been an international puppet festival in Britain. And about this time we were hearing about puppetry in the Iron Curtain countries. The best ballet, the best puppetry could be found in the Iron Curtain countries. So Eric thought, can we get some of these over to Colwyn Bay? He went to the council and he sold the idea. And the council, fair play, they backed him. That's what started it. And it was a terrific success. I mean, it made a profit.
The festival was a great success and led to a second festival being held for the Organisation of World Puppetry, UNIMA, to host their annual meeting in Colwyn Bay. This would be the first time they would host their annual meeting outside of a capital city.
names that stand out. A bloke called George Latshaw. George Latshaw came from America and he was booked. He was in the theatre in Colwyn Bay, which in those days was the Prince of Wales Theatre, which has now become Theatre Colwyn. But unfortunately, he hadn't any puppets. He had to come up here without the puppets because they hadn't arrived at Heathrow. So he got here and the puppets have eventually arrived, but they couldn't be forwarded here because he had to sign the customs or something duty. So he had to go to get them. But he was on the next day. Anyway, to cut a long story short, it's the only time that the Holyhead mail train, because in those days, all your letters used to be sorted on the train. They had a sorting office on the train, and the mail train used to go through Colwyn Bay and never stopped at Colwyn Bay. And it was stopped specially so that George could get on to get down to pick up his puppets. So I remember him particularly. But we also had a lady called Jane Phillips. She came up with a troupe of, I think it was 4 girls, which she called caricature theatre.
So we had all these amazing countries come to Colwyn Bay to this first puppet festival which Eric organised. And I went there. I think I played in the Pier Pavilion, which now is in the sea. I think the Pier Pavilion's come to an end. But in those days, they were students of mine. And so the first show that we ever did was with students. But the following year, I set up my own company, and I got a grant from the Welsh Arts Council. For me, it was wonderful. It was like bringing the whole world to my doorstep. And I think that it speaks of the hospitality that Wales can produce, because Colwyn Bay is quite a small town, and so everybody could get close to everybody else. And of course, it was very exciting to meet anyone from behind the Iron Curtain at that time.
We had the Mount Stewart Hotel, which is just adjacent to the Puppet Theatre. That was the official festival hotel. And so all the puppeteers were in there, both the English puppeteers, Welsh puppeteers, and the ones from abroad. We got them all in there. So it was pretty full with puppeteers. And a coach arrived with, I don't know how many people get on a coach, something like 40, I think. They were all Americans, American amateur puppeteers who were doing Europe. They'd been in various parts of Europe and they'd come to England and they'd heard about this festival, but they hadn't booked or they hadn't any hotels, and they all wanted to stay in the festival hotel. I mean, they'd come to this festival from America, and they're very demanding, Americans. So they've somehow persuaded the management to double people up. People say, would you mind sharing? You know, there's a twin bed in your room. You've got it as a single. Do you mind? They even had somebody sleeping in a bath. So that all these Americans, or a large number of them, could be accommodated in the hotel.
Well, terribly important to Wales, because we'd never had anything like that happen in Wales before. But important too because they brought all these puppeteers from behind the Iron Curtain to Wales. And there were an amazing number of people involved. My favourite company were a Polish company, and the strange thing about it was that the director of the company was Henrik Rill, so it was like Rill, the seaside town in North Wales, and the name of the company was the Harlequin Company. It was so beautiful and so brightly coloured and full of fun. It was just what I would love to have learned how to do. But of course, growing up in this country, puppeteers were not considered to be very important at all. So we never learned all that sort of thing.
On the first festival, the Polish company, we became very friendly with the head of that. He was called Henrik Rill. He came with 12 puppeteers. He was at the Prince of Wales Theatre. During his performance, Jan Bussell and his wife were sat in the seats, and next to them were two of the Polish puppeteers. Jan Bussell was the man who introduced Muffin the Mule. Anyway, they said to these two puppeteers, "Why aren't you on the stage?" And they hadn't much English, but they just smiled and they said, "Polizia." So there were two policemen, you see, who come with the troupe. So on the second festival, which I was now directing, when I was negotiating with Henrik as to how many people we could afford to pay for, in one of my letters I said, well, if you don't bring your policeman this time, it'll give you 2 extra puppeteers. Neither of us thought anything of it. We agreed his number and all the rest of it. About 3 weeks before the festival was due, I got a call to go up to the town hall, and I was asked to ring this Henrik Rill. He said somebody had read the letter that I'd written, and he said, it's doubtful if I'll be able to come. Somebody had taken offence to this, and he said, to try and salvage matters, he said, would I get the Lord Mayor to write a personal invitation to him and make it very, very formal. We virtually re-invited him all over again. Henrik told me that he was on the tarmac with all the trunks and, all the puppets and his 10 puppeteers, not knowing whether they were going to be allowed to get on the plane or not, right to the last minute. Before they set off, his wife was taken away, and he personally was told that he was responsible for the whole of the troupe, and if anybody, jumped ship, he would be for the salt mines, sort of thing. So it's quite frightening, but he still did a very good show. I can't remember which went with which, but one of them we performed Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado, and then of course we did Cabaret, which is where we dropped the front curtains in front of the actual stage, and we form a kind of puppetry which Eric was the first to do in Britain, again another of his first, what we call cabaret style puppetry. It was based on there's a form of puppetry in Japan called bunraku. And bunraku, they use large puppets, and the operators dress in black. They're pretending that they're invisible, and the audience enter into the pretend. So you can see them being manipulated. There's no scenery, there's no special lighting. There's just your sound and the puppet. And Eric translated this to my marionettes. He dressed in black, but he worked the puppets in full view against the background with 2 spotlights on the puppets. So you've got to work them well enough so you don't need scenery, so that the puppet, convinces. And that's the style of puppetry that he used to use when he worked al fresco in Wallasey, and when he worked in cabarets and things like that. And I used the same style when I worked in, I started off my career in the northern clubs, and then later on, when we lost television, Eric and I started working a whole new career on cruise ships using this style of puppetry. But in the theatre, because the theatre was built for Eric, this is why there's a platform at the front here. The curtains drop down, and at the end of every show, he does about a quarter of an hour, or I do, of showing them how it works. The puppets are worked in full view, you see, which the audience, some people like watching you with fingers, and some people watch the puppets. So.
Eric and Chris continued their shows in the Harlequin Puppet Theatre alongside their successful programmes on the BBC and other ventures such as performing on cruise ships and writing books. Sadly, however, In 1996, Eric Bramwell passed away suddenly during the Harlequin's 38th season.
I don't know anybody, I've never heard anybody say a bad word about Eric. I mean, they say that about people, but he just seemed to get on with everybody. He was very intelligent, he was very cultured. He was one of these people, he knew about everything. You know, if there was a Latin phrase I wanted to know, I'd ask Eric. If I wanted to know what a pre-Raphaelite was, or what the difference between Cubism and Impressionism or something, he knew because he'd been to art school. He had a great knowledge of painting, he had a great knowledge of sculpture, he had a great knowledge about Chinese art particularly. He had an absolute fund of stories, anecdotes, which I used to love. Many of these anecdotes were from his touring days, but he could tell a story, an anecdote, and enjoy it, so that I enjoyed it. And when I was in company, I'd do, "Oh, Eric, tell them about so-and-so when you were doing so-and-so." And I could sit, and although I'd heard the same story over and over again, I found joy in him telling that story to somebody else.
He was a lovely man. I can't imagine anyone who ever met him that didn't absolutely love him. He really was just a lovely character, and always lots of funny stories, which however many times he told them, he always found them hilariously funny. And so he made you laugh because he was so enthusiastic about these stories he would tell about the early days of the British Puppet Guild and his days in pantomime and things like that. You know, it was full of anecdotes, theatrical anecdotes. Yeah, a really entertaining man.
By the time I met Eric, I was teaching at the College of Music and Drama in Cardiff. At that time, he'd opened this theatre, which was something really special. I mean, no one had actually built a puppet theatre in this country, and he did that in 1958. So that was always very special in my mind because it was in Wales, and the two of us was like north and south of Wales trying to interest people in puppet theatre. I'd like to add my respect, mainly Eric, who started it all, and then Christopher, who has nobly kept it going even after Eric's gone. And thinking how many people it must have pleased and how many holiday makers have come and gone and suddenly discovered it and thought how unusual to find a building built entirely for puppets, and just enjoyed the whole experience of seeing a puppet show.
Chris had to come up with an emergency one-man show to finish that year's summer season, which became the pattern for all future productions.
Allows me to live here in this tower, spending the end of my days spinning.
Oh, it's changed it terrifically. The style of the shows, the technical quality of the shows is much less. For some of our productions, we used to have as many as 5 people backstage, and you can't do the same thing with one person.
These shows continue to bring joy to audiences of all ages.
The little friend of mine, I met him when I used to do a lot of shows at Penryn Castle. One time I said to his mum, I said, "Why don't you bring Wayne to the puppet theatre? He'd never been." So I said, "It's just like we do at Penryn," but I said, "Except I do the magic on the stage and whatnot." I said, "He can come on the stage and help me." Oh, she said, "No, he'll be too shy. I don't know if he'll even go in the theatre." I said, "Well, bring him on and see." I said, "If he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to." So when he arrived, I saw him coming up the drive, and he'd got a cloak on and a magic hat, you know, a little top hat. And he'd got a magic wand and he's coming up the drive. And I thought, this isn't a kid who doesn't want to go on the stage. Anyway, he came in the theatre and we had a chat. When the magic part started, I just asked for an assistant and I looked at him and I said, do you want to? And he said, yeah. So I got him up and he was absolutely rigid with fear on the stage, but he wanted to. I mean, he did what he had to do and there was no problem. And since then, I mean, he bounds up on the stage, you know, no nerves at all.
My name is called Alex, this is Mr. Punch. Hello!
My name's Stephen Hennessy. I'm a regular at the Harlequin and I've known Chris now for probably 15 years. The first time we went to the theatre was after we met Chris in Penryn Castle when he was doing a Punch and Judy show, and we've kept going ever since. We go to the theatre every time Chris does a show. If it's half term, end of term, Christmas, we always make at least one visit. And it's a nice interest that me and my son can have together that, you know, we would never have expected to have really. If it wasn't for the theatre, we'd probably never been interested in puppets in general.
I already performed Punch and Judy. I was doing some shows at school after May half term. And one of his tricks that I really want to know is how does he make sweets out of cotton wool? Out of one tin. But our musician never reveals his secrets. No, he doesn't.
The theatre means lots of happy memories of the children growing up, and also a great friendship that we've developed with Chris through the theatre.
Oh, it means the world to me. Shouting back you at the pantomimes, and I know how Chris loves it when everybody claps when he does the last marionette of the show, when he does his marionette in cabaret.
And that actually, it's funny. Kids, they fill in with their imagination, and they do half the work for it. I also do Punch and Judy. I love Punch and Judy, and so when I'm not in the puppet theatre pulling strings, so that I can have this luxury of keeping the theatre go, I've got to go outside and do Punch and Judy at village carnivals and agricultural shows, that sort of thing. Now, they're very, very simple puppets, and the puppets that every child has worked, put a puppet on the hand, a hand puppet. And yet quite often, the children will say to me after the show, how do you make them work? And how do you do all those voices? There aren't all those voices. There's one voice, mine, and also Mr. Punch's voice, which you do through a whistle, and it's a squeak. But all those voices, and what they imagine the puppets are doing, the manipulation, it's all in the children's minds. Quite wonderful thing is a kid's imagination.